Okay, so now we're going to be going over the group assignment prototype. So this is the first part of what's going to be due for your final group project. So before we can really understand what we need to do for the prototype, we actually have to look at the requirements for the final group project and what's going to be expected of us. So if you just scroll down in the document, the next section is the group assignment for all the requirements. This is the final thing you're going to turn in. But the gist of what we want to just understand for the prototype is that what we're going to do is we're going to create a WPF application that's an invoice system for a small business. The idea being like, this is for like a jewelry store. And this jewelry store has hired you to write this little invoice system. And so a customer would come up with like a ring and a necklace. The person behind the desk would run your application. They could create a new invoice, add this, necklace or ring or whatever it is, as many pieces of jewelry as they're buying. It gives them the total, and they can save this invoice. They can also go back and search for previous invoices, or they can edit items or add items. Like, so there may be a new necklace or new piece of jewelry that come in. You have to add them to your database so that they can be added to invoices. So that's the gist of what this whole group assignment's going to be done. So if we just go back to the top now and take a look at what's actually going to be due for the group project prototype. So what I found is that a lot of times students would just wait to the last second to start on the final project, and I wanted to force them to actually meet as a team and sort of get the outline of the assignment done beforehand. So that's why I started doing this group assignment prototype. So you're not going to have to do the full requirements. This is just a very, very basic. It's the idea of you would want to create sort of a working prototype and show it to the customer early to make sure you're doing the requirements correctly. This is important here. The prototype will be turned in by just one member of the group, so just turn it in Canvas and then put all of the group members' names. Now the way I've designed this group project is that the project's going to be done in three-person teams. The reason I chose three-person teams is because there's 3 windows that you're going to have to complete. So it works out really well in an online environment in that all you have to do is that, hey, you're assigned the search window. You can go off and complete your whole search window all by yourself and then sort of meet up with your team at a time, and you can integrate your code and it should all still work. And there's just very little things you have to interface between the windows, and we'll talk about that in just a second. So the first thing you do is get together as a group and figure out who's going to do the search window, who's going to do the main window, and who's going to do the edit items window. The main window is a tiny bit more work, so whoever is the most advanced or has the most amount of time will probably want to take on that particular aspect. So with the prototype version, there's 3 parts of this assignment that you're going to have to complete. You're going to have to design the user interface, you're going to have to create an SQL file, and you're also going to have to comment how your windows are going to interface with each other. So now here's the very specific requirements of what you're going to have to do to the prototype. Again, I'm trying to get you to think through how you're going to architect through the program, get your project set up, and so everyone can kind of start working on their own individual screens. So you can see here I'm saying you're going to have to create this WPF project, and inside there you're going to have to create 3 folders. So the very first thing you're going to want to do is create a new solution, call it group project. When it first opens up, you want to delete that main window, just delete it completely. Add these 3 folders. They're called search, main, and items. So once you've created those 3 folders, now we can talk about what we're going to put into each of those 3 folders, which should be kind of obvious in the sense that we're creating a search, a main, and an items folder. Well, inside the search folder, what I want you to do is create 3 different files. The first file is a XAML file called WND search. And so this is going to be your user interface for the search screen. The next file is going to be a class called CLS Search SQL. This is going to contain all of the SQL that is associated with the search window. The last file will be called CLS Search Logic, and this is going to have all your business logic. For the prototype, this particular class is going to be empty at this particular time. Now for the main folder and the items folder, you'll notice they're going to have pretty much the exact same concept for the classes. You'll have a user interface class, an SQL class, and a logic class. So again, just make sure you create those 3 files. I've specified them exactly here in those 3 folders. So now let's talk about the exact requirements of what you're going to have to do for this assignment. The first is that you're going to have to create the GUI for each of the windows. So let's pretend you have the search window. So if you have the search window, you create the GUI. You drag and drop some combo boxes on there. You drag and drop a data grid on there. You drag and drop some buttons on there. You read the requirements down below for the search window, so it looks like your GUI interface has everything it needs to function properly. So again, so make sure it does that. Now once each screen has been created, you have to actually be able to run the application, and I need to be able to navigate between the various windows. So I need to be able to run the application, and then it needs to open up the search window, it needs to open up the edit window, kind of a thing. The next part of the assignment is what I mean by I'm calling the interface. And so I'm trying to make you think through how the main window is going to interact with the search window and how it's going to interact with the edit items window. So you'll notice that our group project again is isolated where we've got a main window, a search window, and an edit items window. So what you need to do now is that the main window knows about the other two windows, but those other two windows don't know about anything but themselves. So for example, we have to have the ability for the user to be able to search for an invoice, select an invoice, click OK. Main window needs to then show all the details for that invoice. So how are we going to do that? So how do we meet the requirements for what I'm telling you to do here? So what I want you to do is to stub out some code and just write some comments for me on how these windows are going to interface with each other. So let's start with the search window. So again, remember the search window doesn't know about anything else. It just knows about itself. So the search window says to itself, okay, I'm going to have to be able to have a way that someone from the outside can ask me, has an invoice been selected, yes or no? So that means, has the user clicked the OK button? Yes, an invoice has been selected. Has the user clicked the cancel button or the X at the top of the screen? No, the user has not selected an invoice. So maybe what we do is we create a Boolean property that says invoice bool, invoice selected, true or false. We also know that if the user did select an invoice, they clicked the OK button, then we need to be able to pass the invoice ID back to the main window. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a public property where we set the selected invoice. So that back to the main window now, when they click on the menu and click search, it's going to open up this modal window, and then basically it pauses the code in the main window so that we know when it comes back from that little line of code, we know that the user's either closed down the window, they've clicked OK, or they've clicked cancel. So the next line of code in the main window, what you're going to do is you're going to write a comment that says, this code opens up the search window. Upon return, we're going to look at a property in the search window to see if the user selected an invoice. If an invoice was selected, we're going to access the invoice ID property so that the main window can load the invoice here. So again, you just have to write the comments on how you're going to communicate with each other. The edit items window, it just has to have some sort of property that says, hey, I've updated some I've added an item, I've deleted an item. It just has something been updated, really just one Boolean variable. The main window, when it comes back to the main window, it can say, hey, has something been updated on as an item been added? Has it been edited? And the reason it needs to know that is because there's a combo box that lists out all of the particular items. And so if you don't refresh that list, it's going to be stale. A new item may have just been added, but if the main window doesn't get refreshed, then that item won't be added to that combo box. The last requirement is that for these SQL classes that you're going to have to create. Now again, there's 3 SQL classes, a search, a main, and an items SQL. So each of these classes will hold the SQL associated with that window. That way it's completely broken out. So if someone 5 years from now needed to come update your project and they found a bug with the search window and when they knew it was something to do with SQL, they could go right to your project. Oh, here's a search window. They could open that up. Oh, here's a class that contains all the SQL statements, and they could go right in there. So what I have the expectation for you to do is to create that class. Then inside that class, I want you to create methods that do nothing but return this SQL. Now, in that files for students zip file that I gave you, that there's a final project help document that contains all of the SQL for every one of these windows. So all you really have to do is take those SQL statements, and you may have to I've given you the example. So for instance, I may have hard-coded an invoice ID where you'll need to convert that SQL statement to where you pass in the parameter for the invoice ID and it gets tacked on. But I've given you all of the SQL statements. So all you have to do is create a method that again just builds and returns the SQL statement for each of the individual SQL statements that I've already given you. Now, this code should not execute the SQL statement. That would be done in the logic in the actual final project. This is just creating the class that's just going to hold the SQL. Again, no other business logic, just the SQL here. So hopefully then each of you get your different, your tasks, whether, which window you're going to complete. I would recommend you start earlier than later and figure out, how rules for your group, how we're going to communicate. We're going to meet up every week, or we're going to meet in person, we're going to meet on Google Hangouts, kind of figure out all those things and divvy out the parts, and then just let me know if you have any questions.